Hello everyone, in this video, we'll be talking about the component registry and vRealize automation. With any kind of application, there's services. Those services accomplish some kind of work. The component registry is a place where those services can register themselves to allow clients to access those services. But services is a pretty broad term. It's like saying web server. We know that web servers has lots of other services that make up that one web server. And a service is no different. Let's take a health check for an example. Our health check is a service that's made up of all sorts of little checks underneath of it. Those individual checks would be called endpoint services. In the component registry, we could look up that health check, and we could look up that endpoint service and say, I need to query that particular endpoint service to find the status of this resource. If I click on services, I can see a list of all the services that are currently registered. And on the status, I can see that they're all registered. We also have failed and we have blank. Failed would be that we're having some kind of issue with that service, or maybe it's not running. And if I see it as blank, it means we can talk to the service, but whatever we're getting back is not quite correct. One of the items I want to mention with our registered status is even though we see something as registered, it doesn't necessarily mean it's working on the back end. We can talk to it, but it's not able to perform its function. But luckily, we've got a page that gives us a little bit more information. I want to talk about the URL real quick. We're going to our component registry, looking at our services, and we're checking the status. But then I put this thing that says page equals 1, and then limit equals 50. By default, we display the first 20 services. And unfortunately, there's no next button to jump to see additional services. So that limit equals 50 says display 50 services. I don't have more than 50 services, so I can see them all on one page. This allows me to see the name of the service, the status endpoint URL. This is where the clients would be querying and talking to that URL to find the status of that service. And then we can see the initialization status. In this case, it says registered. I can also browse to that URL to make sure it's working. One more piece I want to point out before we start turning off services is over on our admin page. All the tabs at the top are served from our vRA appliance, with the exception of our infrastructure tab. That tab comes from our IaaS web server. That'll be key once we start stopping these services in the environment. I'm going to switch over to our IaaS web server and head to our services page. The first service that I want to stop is the VMware vCloud Automation Center service. This is our manager service. This is the one that's responsible for talking to vRA and talking to our SQL server and coordinating communications to our DEM worker and DEM orchestrator. With the service stopped, I'll click on refresh on our services page. But I can see that all the services are still reporting as registered. If I go to our admin page and click on our infrastructure tab, which is being served by our IaaS web server, I can see an error message at the top that says our manager server is not running. Depending on what version of vRA is in use, we handled this differently. In the past, we actually didn't even load the infrastructure tab. But with the newer versions, we've gotten better, and now we display an error message. We'll go ahead and start that service back up, and let's stop our DEM orchestrator next. If I click a refresh on our component registry, I can now see our iaas-service is failed. For us to have a successful working IaaS web server, we have to have the web server available. Model Manager Web has to be available. Model Manager Data, the manager server, DEM owner, and DEM worker. All 6 of those have to be working correctly for us to have a successful environment. Now, the one I didn't mention was the proxy agent, which is responsible for connecting to our endpoints like vCenter. If that's not working, we'll have issues provisioning machines. But the original 6 are the only ones which are required to have a successful working vRA environment. I can see that our IaaS service is currently failed, but I don't know why. And that's where our component registry, the XML report, really becomes handy. Under my IaaS service, I can see our initialization status is failed. And the error message says no distributed execution manager is running an orchestrator. This gives me a little bit more information about what is going on in the environment. In addition, if I was to also stop the worker, refresh our page, I can see our error message says there's no DEM worker or DEM orchestrator that's currently running. If I head back to our admin page, I'll click on infrastructure again. It reports the DEM worker and the DEM orchestrator are currently not running. If I click on the monitoring tab and then DEM status, I can see that both of them are reporting as offline. We'll go ahead and start both of them back up, refresh our page, and we can see they're both showing as online. In addition, our component registry is showing it as registered. I want to show one last failure, and that's with our IaaS server. When we saw our IaaS server, it creates a couple pools for us. If I stop those pools and head back to our infrastructure tab, I can see I'm now getting a service unavailable, errors 503. An error 503 can mean quite a few things. It could mean we're having issues with the pools. It could also mean we're having issue connecting to our SQL database. Or maybe we're having some kind of cert related issue. Or maybe we're having an issue with a service account, or maybe some kind of dependency for service. There's multiple different reasons that can cause this 503 error. If I click on refresh on our component registry, I can see that the IaaS service is currently blank. We can talk to it because the IaaS server is still available. We've just stopped the pools. And as a result, we're not receiving the communication that we're expecting. To wrap up this video, we talked about the component registry, where all the services register who they are and how to get to them. We then looked at the status of those services. We then wrapped up by stopping a few of those services and monitoring their output. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope it's been informative.